There's a story they don't tell in history books, not in the documentaries, not in the polite interviews with explorers or scholars. It's whispered in corners of the Amazon, told around fires by those who remember. A story about three white men who walked into the jungle looking for a lost city and were never seen again. You've heard the official explanations. They got lost, they died of fever, they vanished chasing a dream. But what if the truth was darker? What if they were killed, not by the jungle, but by something watching them from the trees? What if they were eaten? There are reports, buried testimonies, and one chilling account never released to the public from a tribe that says, "We saw them, we warned them, they disrespected the spirits, so we performed the ritual." This isn't just speculation, it's a forbidden theory, ignored, ridiculed, and buried for nearly 100 years. But today, we're digging it up. This is what might have really happened to Percy Fawcett. In April 1925, Percy Fawcett entered the jungle for the last time. He wasn't a fool. He was one of Britain's top cartographers, a war hero. He had mapped the borders of South America. He knew the risks, but he also believed that hidden deep between the Xingu and Tapajos rivers lay the ruins of an ancient civilization. He called it Z. And this time he brought only two people, his 21-year-old son, Jack, and Jack's friend, Raleigh Ramel. No military escort. No rescue plan. He didn't want attention. He didn't want interference. He wanted discovery, on his own terms. From Cuiabá, they traveled by river and foot into some of the most unexplored jungle on Earth. At Dead Horse Camp, Fawcett sent his last letter. He wrote, "We are hopeful. I don't think we shall have any difficulty." It was the last anyone ever heard from them. Weeks passed, then months. Silence, and then the rumors started. Some said they had died from fever. Others said they had been attacked by wild animals. But one rumor, whispered, then buried, said something else. That the three men had entered territory they shouldn't have, that they had ignored sacred protocol, and that a local tribe had made sure they didn't leave. Years later, a Kalapalo elder told a visiting reporter, "Yes, we saw them. They made camp near our village. They were warned. They didn't listen." That same elder paused, looked down, and said, "They died, all three. We burned the bodies, so no spirits would return." That line never made it into the official reports, because if it did, it would raise a darker question. What if they weren't just killed, but consumed? Years passed. Dozens of expeditions set out to find Fawcett. Most came back empty-handed. Some didn't come back at all. But in 1951, something surfaced. A young Brazilian tribal contact, speaking through a missionary, claimed to have met a man who saw the fate of the three Englishmen. According to him, they had camped too close to sacred ground. They refused to offer gifts. They disrespected a ceremonial fire. And then, they were ambushed. He claimed one was shot with a poison arrow. The others were clubbed and dragged. What happened next? Their bodies were taken to the village, he said. They were used in the ritual. He didn't elaborate. But in tribal Amazonian culture, that phrase has a specific meaning. Not symbolic, literal. It means the eating of the dead, either to gain strength or to keep the soul from wandering. Of course, the story was dismissed. No photographs, no bones, just words. But here's the thing. Around that same time, an American explorer claimed to have purchased a brass compass from a tribal market, one that matched the exact model Percy Fawcett carried. And in another part of Mato Grosso, a missionary swore he found a knife with the initials JF carved into the handle. Still, nothing was taken seriously. It didn't fit the official narrative. It was too wild, too disturbing, too irreversible. Because if true, it would mean that one of the greatest British explorers of the modern era wasn't lost, wasn't martyred. He was eaten ritually, systematically, and erased, and the world chose not to believe it. To understand what might have happened to Percy Fawcett, you have to understand the silence around it. Because in the Western world, cannibalism is a taboo, a horror story, a metaphor. But in parts of the Amazon, especially in the early 20th century, it wasn't just real. It was ritual. In some tribes, eating parts of a fallen enemy wasn't savagery. It was ceremony. It was believed that the body held the essence of power, and that power had to be contained. Consume it, and you neutralize it. You absorb it. You silence it forever. And sometimes it wasn't about power. It was about punishment. Violating sacred rules, disrupting tribal balance, trespassing on land protected by spirits. That wasn't just an insult. It was a threat. And threats had to be removed. There's an anthropological report, never formally published, from a Jesuit missionary in the 1930s. He wrote, "Certain tribes believe that if an outsider sees the spirit ground without permission, the forest will rot from within. The only way to reverse the curse is to burn the body, then consume the ashes with root drink." Sound familiar? Fawcett's last camp was said to be built near a sacred clearing. He carried no interpreter, no gifts, and refused to engage in traditional greetings. Some say he did this intentionally, to show strength. Others say he simply didn't care. But to the tribe watching him from the trees, it might not have mattered. All they saw was a man breaking the rules and walking willingly into ritual death. Because to them, he wasn't just a trespasser. He was a disturbance, a spirit that had to be quieted, not lost, not honored, not rescued, erased. Over the decades, dozens of people entered the jungle to find Percy Fawcett. Some were journalists, some were soldiers, a few were obsessed. They came back with stories fragmented, dismissed, or worse, ignored. In 1943, a Brazilian explorer named Orlando Villas-Boas spoke with a Kalapalo elder. The old man said he remembered 3 white men passing through decades earlier. They did not bring gifts. They refused to listen. They walked into cursed land. When Villas-Boas pressed further, the elder looked away and said, "The spirits took them. That is all." But perhaps the most disturbing account came from a German anthropologist in 1958. He spent 3 months living among a remote tribe near the Xingu River. One night, after gaining their trust, a shaman told him about a forbidden ritual from long ago, where 3 foreign men were punished for violating sacred ground. He described fire, chanting, bones turned to ash, and a feast to purify the land. When shown a photo of Fawcett, the shaman stared for several minutes, then turned away. No words. Just silence. Officially, none of this was ever recorded. The notes stayed in private archives, passed between researchers, quietly, cautiously, as if speaking it aloud made it real. Because if these testimonies are true, then the story of Percy Fawcett is not about disappearance. It's not about mystery. It's about denial. The denial of what happens when we walk into ancient places with modern arrogance and ignore the rules that were never ours to break. And if even part of these accounts are accurate, then Fawcett's final moments weren't heroic. They were ceremonial. Why haven't you heard this story? Why isn't the cannibal tribe theory taught in documentaries? Why isn't it in school books or museum exhibits? Because from the beginning, this story was inconvenient. To the British Empire, Percy Fawcett was a symbol of courage, of ambition, of civilized exploration. To admit he was killed by an uncontacted tribe in a ritual too gruesome to describe wouldn't just be a tragedy. It would be a humiliation. For decades, reports were filtered. Notes went missing. Witness statements were rewritten. Files marked hearsay. And in some cases, destroyed. Even Fawcett's own family pushed back against the darker theories. His younger son Brian spent years defending his father's legacy. insisting he was too experienced to offend a tribe, that he must have died nobly, perhaps of disease or starvation. But what if it wasn't about what happened, but why it couldn't be allowed to become true? Because if a lost tribe in the Amazon ritually killed, and possibly ate, 3 educated white explorers, then the narrative collapses. The jungle becomes the victor, not the unknown, not the enemy, but the force that refused to be claimed. It challenges everything: the supremacy of the West, the morality of conquest, the illusion of control. So instead, the world let the story die, quietly, conveniently. Like the trail Fawcett left behind, the truth was overgrown, buried under layers of time and doubt, but the whispers never stopped. And in the heart of the forest, where fire once burned, some say the ritual still echoes. Not in violence, but in warning. A message: some paths are not meant to be taken, and some cities are not meant to be found. Let's say the theory is true. Let's say Fawcett and his men entered sacred land, ignored warnings, broke taboos, and were killed for it. Not as an act of war, but of ritual. What would that mean? It would mean that the jungle didn't defeat them, it judged them. That they didn't vanish by accident, but by consequence. That somewhere beneath the canopy lie bones that were burned or scattered or consumed. It would mean that Fawcett didn't find Z because Z wasn't meant to be found. Because it was never just a city, it was an idea, a boundary, and he crossed it. It would also mean that history once again chose comfort over truth, that we'd rather believe in mystery than face the possibility of justice from a culture we never tried to understand. It means that even now, when we look at a map of the Amazon, we're not seeing the whole picture, just the parts we're allowed to. Because this wasn't just a disappearance, it was a message, one written not in ink or stone, but in ash. You came uninvited, you refused to listen, and now you are part of the forest. For almost a century, we've asked, what happened to Percy Fawcett? But maybe the better question is, what happens when we go too far and don't come back? Because the jungle doesn't need to speak. It remembers, and sometimes it doesn't forgive. Fawcett's compass never turned up in a museum. No grave was found, no bones returned home, just silence. But silence can speak, if you know how to listen. And in the Amazon, silence is never empty. It holds memories, warnings, and sometimes ghosts. Perhaps that's the truth no one wanted to face. Not that Fawcett died, but that he was received, taken not by savages, but by a system older than our maps, older than our gods, older than our rules. Maybe Z was never stone or ruin. Maybe it was the line between arrogance and humility. And Fawcett? He crossed it. He didn't just vanish. He surrendered to something he couldn't conquer, to a world that never asked to be found. 100 years later, we still send drones and scientists, still search the forest for proof of what we think we deserve to know. But some truths don't want to be unearthed. Some questions are answers in disguise. So the next time you hear the story of Percy Fawcett, don't ask what killed him. Ask, what did he find? That was never meant to be seen. The legend of Z didn't disappear in the jungle. It became the jungle.